Let me tell you something that took me years to accept. The quality of your audit is not determined by what you find. It is determined by what changes afterwards. And here is the uncomfortable implication. A brilliant finding that nobody acts on is worth exactly nothing. Less than nothing actually, because now the organization knows and did not fix it, which is a worse legal position than not knowing at all. I have written findings I was proud of that died in a report. Technically perfect, well evidenced, completely ignored. Because I wrote them for other auditors instead of for the person who had to act. So what will this chapter give you? You will learn the types of audit evidence and their relative strength. You will develop interview techniques that get truth rather than performance. You will review documents properly, apply sampling methods that hold up, and evaluate whether your evidence is actually sufficient. Then you will learn to write observations that land, rate risk honestly, find root causes rather than symptoms, build corrective action plans that get done, and prepare executive reports that get read. This is the chapter where your work either becomes change or becomes filing. Let us make sure it is the first one. So let us talk about evidence, and I want to give you a hierarchy because not all evidence is equal, and treating it as equal is how audits fall apart. At the bottom, oral evidence. Someone told you. It is a starting point, never a conclusion. Above that, written representation. Someone told you in writing. Better because they thought about it. Still just a claim, but now a claim they signed. Above that, documentary evidence produced by the organization. A policy, a report, a register. Useful, but remember, they made it. And people make documents that describe how they wish things worked. Higher still, system-generated evidence. A log, a timestamp, an audit trail. Now we are getting somewhere because the system did not know you were coming. And at the top, evidence you generated yourself. You ran the query, you submitted the request, you compared the two lists. Let me show you why this matters. At a client, I had 3 pieces of evidence about deletion. The team said it worked, the policy described it working, and the system log showed the last successful deletion run was 14 months earlier. Same control, 3 evidence types, only one was true. So here is my rule. When evidence conflicts, trust the one that was created without you in the room. Systems do not perform for auditors. People do, and they do it sincerely. Climb the hierarchy, always. So let us talk about interviews, and I want to share the single most useful thing I have learned in 20 years of doing this. Silence. Here is what I mean. You ask a question. The person gives you a short answer. And then, instead of moving on, you just wait. 3 seconds. 4. It feels agonizing. And almost every time, they keep talking. And the second half is where the truth is. Let me give you an example. I asked a data engineer whether the retention job ran successfully. He said yes. I nodded and said nothing. 4 seconds. And then he added, well, it runs, though it has been failing on the archive tables for a while. We keep meaning to look at it. I did not ask a follow-up question. I just did not fill the gap. Second technique. Never ask a question that has a comfortable answer. Do not ask, do you follow the process? Ask, when was the last time you could not follow the process and what did you do? That question assumes the exception exists, which it always does, and gives permission to describe it. Third, interview people separately, never together. Because the moment a manager is in the room, the junior person stops describing reality and starts describing the manager's expectations. And be human, genuinely. If people feel judged, they perform. If they feel heard, they explain. You want the explanation. So now, document review. And I want to challenge the instinct most people have, which is to read for content. Read for evidence of life instead. Here is what I mean. A document tells you two things: what it says and whether anyone uses it. And the second one matters more. So look at the metadata. When was it last modified? By whom? A retention policy last touched 4 years ago in an organization that has migrated systems twice since is not a policy. It is an artifact. Look at the version history. Does it show argument? Real documents get changed because someone objected. A document with one version and no history was written once and never tested. Look at approval. Who signed it, and does that person still work there? Let me tell you what I found at a client. Their incident response plan looked excellent, comprehensive, current looking. Then I checked the properties. Last modified 31 months earlier. It referenced a system they had decommissioned, and the approver had retired. Nobody had read it in 2.5 years, including the people who handed it to me that morning. And here is my favorite test. Ask the person who gave you the document to find something specific inside it. Watch how they navigate. If they know exactly where to look, it is a living document. If they scroll and squint, they have never opened it either. So let us talk about sampling, and I want to demystify something because people get nervous here. The purpose of sampling is not statistical elegance. It is to be able to say something true about a population you cannot examine entirely. That is all. Now there are two broad approaches and you need both. Random sampling asks, what is the typical state? You pull records without bias and you find out what normal looks like. Good for measuring compliance rates. Targeted sampling asks, where is it broken? You deliberately pick the awkward cases, the oldest record, the account from the acquired company, the customer with the unusual name, the transaction on the last day of the migration. Let me show you why targeting matters. At a client, a random sample of 50 consent records came back clean, 98% compliant. Lovely. Then I pulled 10 records deliberately, all from customers who had signed up during their platform migration window. 9 of the 10 had no consent record at all. It had simply not carried across. Random sampling would have needed hundreds of records to find that. Targeting found it in an hour. So use random to measure, use targeted to discover. And always document why you chose what you chose. Because the first question anyone asks about a finding is, how do you know this is not just one bad record? Sampling is how you answer that. Evidence evaluation and sufficiency. So here is the question I want you to ask yourself before every finding you write. Is this enough? And I mean that seriously, because there are two ways to fail here and they are opposite. The first is under-evidencing. You found one bad record and you wrote a finding calling it a systemic failure. Then in the closing meeting, someone says, that was a one-off from the migration. Here are 99 correct ones. And your finding evaporates, and with it, your credibility for everything else in the report. The second failure is over-evidencing. You keep testing long after you knew the answer because you are nervous. That is not rigor. That is procrastination with a spreadsheet. So how do you know when you have enough? Here is my test. Imagine the person who will most want to reject this finding. Picture them in the room. Now what is the first thing they will say? Whatever that is what your evidence must survive. Let me give you an example. I once had a finding about access reviews. My evidence was one review that had been skipped. Weak. So I asked myself, what would they say? They would say, that was one quarter, we were short-staffed. So I pulled 12 quarters. 4 had been skipped. Now the finding held. 3 considerations. Is it relevant? Is it reliable? Is it sufficient? Sufficient means it survives the pushback, not that it fills a folder. So let us talk about writing, and I want to say something that might sound harsh. Most audit findings are written to protect the auditor, not to help the organization. You can spot it immediately. Passive voice everywhere. It was observed that controls may not be operating as designed. Who observed? Which controls? May not or do not. That sentence is armor. It cannot be wrong because it does not say anything. So here is the structure I use, and it is simple. What is happening? What should be happening? How I know? Why it matters? What happens if it continues? 5 parts, plain language. Let me show you the difference. Bad version. Retention controls were noted to be inconsistently applied in certain instances. Better version. Customer records from account closures in 2019 are still live in the CRM. The policy requires deletion after 24 months. We found 412 such records in a sample of 500. Nobody has built a deletion job for this system. If this continues, the population grows by roughly 2,000 records a month. Do you see? The second one, someone can act on. The first one, someone can file. And here is my final rule. Write the finding so that the person who must fix it understands it without a translator. If it needs an auditor to explain it, you have written it for the wrong audience. So now, risk rating. And I want to be honest about something. This is where audits lose credibility fastest, and it is usually our own fault. Here is the pattern. Everything gets rated high, because high feels serious, and serious feels important. So the report has 14 high findings, and management looks at it and thinks, well, if everything is critical, nothing is. And they are right. So how do you rate honestly? 2 dimensions. How likely is harm, and how bad would it be? But I want you to add a third thing that most frameworks miss. Who gets hurt? Let me show you why. A client had 2 findings. 1. A gap in vendor contract clauses across 40 vendors. Wide, systemic, looked serious. 2. An unencrypted spreadsheet with 200 employee health records on a shared drive. 40 versus 200. The first looks bigger. But the first was a paperwork gap where no harm had occurred. The second was health data, exposed right now about people who trusted their employer. I rated the second higher, and the CFO argued with me for an hour, and I said, if this leaks tomorrow, which one do you want to explain? He stopped arguing. So rate by harm to people, not by count of instances. And be willing to rate something low. Your highs only mean something if your lows exist. So here is where I think most audits stop one step too early. They find the problem and report it, but they never ask why it happened. And without that, every fix is a patch. Let me show you what I mean with a real case. A client had a finding, deletion requests not fulfilled on time. Symptom, easy to see. So I asked why. Because the team was overloaded. Why? Because volume had tripled after a marketing campaign. Why did nobody notice? Because there was no metric tracking request volume. Why not? Because when the process was designed, nobody expected volume to change. Do you see where we ended up? The finding was late deletions. The root cause was a process designed for a company that no longer existed, with no mechanism to notice it had outgrown itself. Fix the symptom and you hire another person. Fix the cause and you build a capacity trigger. Now a warning. Root cause analysis has a failure mode. It becomes blame. Why did this happen? Because Rajesh forgot. That is not a root cause. That is a person. And the real question is, why does this process depend on Rajesh remembering? Systems fail. People are just where the failure becomes visible. Ask why 5 times. Stop when you reach something you can actually change. So we have the finding, we have the cause, now the fix. And I want to tell you plainly, most corrective action plans are wishes with dates attached. Here is what they look like. Action: implement enhanced retention controls. Owner, IT, due date, Q4. Read that back. Who exactly is IT? What does enhanced mean? Which day in Q4? That plan will not happen, and everyone in the room knows it, and everyone signs it anyway. So what makes a real one? 3 things. A named human being, not a department, a person with a name who knows their name is on it. Departments do not fix things, people do. A verifiable outcome, not implement controls, but a scheduled job deletes eligible records monthly and produces a log we can inspect. Now I know what done looks like, and so do they. And a date that someone negotiated rather than accepted. If they say Q4 without arguing, they have not thought about it. Let me tell you what good looks like. A client's ops head told me, I cannot do this in 3 months, I need 6, because the archive migration comes first. That was the best answer I got all week. It was real. And here is my last test. Ask, what would stop this from happening? If they say nothing, they have not started thinking yet. So we come to the final artifact, and I want to reframe what it is for. The executive report is not a summary of your work, it is a decision document. Its only job is to help someone with limited time and enormous responsibility decide what to do. So stop writing it like a compressed version of the detailed report. That is the mistake everyone makes. Here is what actually works. Open with the answer, not the methodology, not the scope, not the acknowledgements, the answer. Something like, the organization can demonstrate compliance in governance and consent collection, but cannot currently fulfill erasure requests or account for data held by 3 of its largest vendors. That is the whole report in one sentence. Everything else is elaboration. Then, the 3 things that matter, not 14, 3, because an executive will remember 3. Then, what you want them to do, specifically, approve the budget, appoint an owner, set a deadline. Let me tell you about a report I got wrong. 18 findings, all documented, 40 pages. The CEO read the first page and asked me one question. So what should I worry about? And I could not answer in under 2 minutes. That was my failure, not his. So write the sentence first. If you cannot say it in one sentence, you have not finished thinking.